Acting Speaker, I'd be happy to forego some of my time for a little bit more story time from the member for Melton about the ambulance services in the 80s, and I've got a tale or two to tell about my uncle, who's also a paramedic in the 80s. We'll get to that though, as I contribute to the Superannuation Legislation Amendment Bill 2025. And this has been a wide-ranging and lengthy debate, and the bill obviously proposes a number of changes to the governance and administration of the Emergency Services Superannuation Scheme and the State Superannuation Fund. I really have a hard time getting my mouth around that. The bill makes 7 key amendments ranging from board composition and nomination processes to adjustments for how and when contributors can make changes to their superannuation settings. It's quite a complex scheme, obviously. Superannuation can be. We heard the member for Euroa talk about some impositions being imposed on some self-managed super funds with regard to taxes, land tax and so forth. And this bill may seem technical, but it does have real-world impacts. Everything we do in this place does. And particularly in regional communities like Mildura, where public sector and emergency workers are essential services. They're the backbone of, particularly our emergency service workers, are the backbone of our community. We've got many emergency services personnel in Mildura with a Fire Rescue Victoria station, Station 72. Obviously, our vast CFA brigades throughout District 18, going right through the Mallee, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Acting Speaker. Paramedics, obviously, our police. We don't have enough personnel, I might just add. I think there's around 50 current vacancies within the Mildura Police Force, with several stations not being able to be manned in major centres like Redcliffs and Merbeen on the periphery of Mildura, which is a real concern. And as we heard the member for Melton refer to his involvement with this scheme since the 80s, one of my uncles, who was also a paramedic through the 80s, is one of the beneficiaries of this scheme. And he started his paramedic career in Swan Hill, and it seems as though the fashion for paramedics is also starting to return. He had quite the moustache when he started, and it seems that quite a few paramedics in Mildura have brought that back, which is alarming to say the very least. He ended up working his way up to be quite high up in Ambulance Victoria, finishing his career a few years ago in Bendigo, and has since then been sauntering around drinking red wine and enjoying his life, so quite the beneficiary of this scheme. However, when we are talking about the futures of paramedics and emergency services, public sector personnel like Uncle Butch, their retirement security should give peace of mind, as superannuation should give peace of mind to everyone. But again, with things like land tax and self-managed super funds being taxed within to the nth degree, it is hard to find that security now. We also have to be careful here. The bill provides a 90% superable salary policy for executive officers and contract employees who are a member of the Emergency Services Superannuation Scheme. And on the surface, this will bring some clarity and consistency to how super is calculated for certain employees, but we need to be careful that we're not creating 2 tiers of retirement outcomes within the same sort of workforce. One for executives, obviously, and another for rank and file workers. In fact, in most areas, but I will speak on behalf of my electorate, which is what I know best. It's not the executives who are carrying the day-to-day burdens in a crisis. It's the frontline workers, as well as the CFA volunteers. And no, they're not eligible for this scheme. Obviously, they are volunteers. They're not paid firefighters. But again, they are the backbone of regional and rural Victoria. They are the ones out there fighting the fires, and soon they will also be the ones paying this emergency services volunteers tax. Fair and equitable? I would think not. You would have to agree, Acting Speaker. But they do cover massive areas across Sunraysia and the Mallee. And VicPol members, like I've said before, responding to emergencies most of the time with very, very limited backup, if any at all. These are the people we do need to support most. Secondly, the bill will also allow contributors to the Emergency Services Superannuation Scheme to change their contribution rate more frequently, from once to twice a year, which also is a practical improvement. Life circumstances change, and in regional communities, employment is often more variable. People move between roles, having to upfill positions that they may never be permanently appointed to. We see that within Ambulance Victoria members at the moment, have done for years. And people obviously move between those roles. They take on additional family responsibilities because of the lack of childcare. So these are things that need to be considered. So giving workers more flexibility is always a positive step, but I mean, these could be mitigated by some other common sense movements in other policy areas. Of course it could be, because everything, like I said, we do in here has real world consequences on the ground. And the thing that we've heard a lot of speakers on this side of the House raise concerns about is the fact that this bill abolishes the requirement for members of the State Super Fund to elect their representatives, and instead proposes that the board members be nominated by a union. Now, I believe in democracy and transparency, and that should be the cornerstones of good governance, especially when we're talking about people's super and ultimately their future. In Mildura, many public servants, retired nurses, teachers, police officers, paramedics are members of the State Super Fund. And they should have a right to elect a representative to advocate for their interests. Those interests should not be quietly removed by an amendment done in here. And these decisions will affect the long-term financial future of these real people who've spent 30 or 40 years working for their community and contributing to a fund that they trusted to do the right thing by them. We owe them a voice, particularly, our nurses. My mother-in-law was a nurse in Victoria for 30 years and has since retired. And it's also a concern for her because she does not subscribe to the union movement, which is interesting. So these are the people that I tend to listen to when considering all sides, because, Acting Speaker, you would know as well as I do that it doesn't matter how flat you make a pancake, there's always two sides, and those two sides should be listened to. That was a quote from the great Dr. Phil, I believe. So superannuation's complicated enough without changing the rules quietly from under people. There's already systemic disadvantage when it comes to retirement outcomes in regional Victoria. People have interrupted careers, like I said. They need to take time off their careers due to lack of childcare and other reasons. There's fewer opportunities to accrue super consistently. So these are just some of those disadvantages, but we want to make sure that this bill isn't just about streamlining administration, but it should be, everything we do in here should be about strengthening trust, but that is seldom the case, it seems. So while there are some practical improvements in this legislation, Acting Speaker, particularly in flexibility and compassion for contributors and their families, I do urge the government to tread very carefully when it comes to governance. Because, as we know, when you remove elected representation and concentrate on that decision-making, taking that democracy and transparency away from members, you risk undermining trust in a system that has already failed too many. We need policy that reflects how people actually live and work in the real world and in regional and rural Victoria. And I know I say this until my lips bleed in this place, but that is my job. So while the intent of this bill in some cases is practical and flexible, I urge the government to ensure that regional workers, like those in my community of Mildura, are heard, respected and protected in the decisions that shape their future, Acting Speaker.